Today's session is In the File, a masterclass on organizing and managing your files. And we're really excited for this one. I hope you've got lots of questions and we're looking to see what Santosh has for us. Today's guest is Santosh. He is the product design lead at Dataguard Germany, and he has some incredible work. I can't wait for you all to see it. And I'm going to hand it over to Santosh now to share his screen.
Thanks, Louis. So I have the screen up. Okay.
Perfect.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Actually, it's really amazing to see so many audience. I think it's fantastic, and let's directly jump into it. I want to talk about three sections. First one's about the general product design systems and how we handle it. The second one about non-product design. That's something that I'm really personally excited about. And the last section is about Q&A, like Louis mentioned. Short intro about Dataguard. Dataguard is an all-in-one data privacy and InfoSec company. We offer legal tech services to companies in the European Union. I think most of you might have heard about the GDPR law. So we help companies become compliant to that. And we are partly people company and a part tech company. So the tech part is why I'm here. People part is where the expertise comes in. On the tech side, that's where we'll focus more on. I'm not here to advertise the company. So on the web platform, though, we have two halves of it. One is a customer-facing app, and the other one's internal data protection officers. That's what we call TPOs. They use that part. So we, as product designers in the company, have to maintain design systems for these two products broadly. And there are so many sub apps and so on that we'll talk about in the next steps. I would like to clarify one thing, why Figma and why this session, also why me. I'm personally experienced in product designing since close to 8 years. And since 4 years or so, I got introduced to Figma in my last company. And since 3 years now in Dataguard, I introduced Figma. Actually, Louis, that's a new info for you probably. And I'm really excited that I did that. And now looking at the scale that it has grown, thanks to all the team members along the journey, Figma is a fantastic solution for us, especially for those reasons, as you see on the screen. It's cloud and real-time collaboration. So most of you who have worked in the past with Sketch and no names, any other software, you might know the advantage here. Version control is something that's really important for us. We keep upgrading a lot. So these iterations and so on, that's an advantage. Shared fonts is a key factor because we, as an organization, we have a unique font. It's not unique, but we have a individual font, and we'd like that to have it on Figma for all the users who, even if they just log into the browser, they can access the font. Asset libraries is something that we will talk about now. That's what I'm proud of. Reusability is in the DNA of Dataguard. I think that's a fantastic way to reuse components. And the last point, actually, prototypes is obvious. The zero-ish setup time. We are a fast-growing company, I believe, and I'm sure that anytime a new member joins in and gets onto Figma, the time it takes to onboard them is quite fast, and it's just like as simple as signing up. So that's a huge advantage for me. Why this session? I would be sharing three core things. One is sharing our learnings from the company and the best practices. Hacky ways of using Figma. That's the second section I mentioned before. And the last one is thinking outside the component. And let's get right into it, Louis.
Let's do it. Let's take a look.
So the first point, actually, when you talk about organizing Figma, in my view, Louis, I think it's more teams and projects. We are a team of a company of 140 plus Figma users. Actually, we have. Of which close to 80 are editors, but that's a decently big scale for a design tool, right? And the reason for that is we have different teams. So sales and marketing, the non-design part. So we use a lot of slide decks and so on Figma. That's one team. And obvious point of products, the customer-facing app, the admin-facing app, that's also on Figma as a team. And then we have a product design systems separate team. This is what I think most of you are familiar with. Along with that, we have branding design systems. So we have a fantastic brand designer in our company, and the illustrations that he has provided, these are all available on Figma as components and all the other benefits that we all know. So that's also a good team. And everything else, as in, it's funny, we use like our HR and finance team also uses Figma, and any other team you can imagine. We have automated that so much that you have components from the branding team, you have components from the slide deck team, from the sales team, for example, and all of them can be combined to communicate what you want to communicate. So that's an advantage. And with that, Louis, I think we can jump into the live demo.
Let's go and take a look at your teams, your projects, your files, your components. Let's have a really deep dive into how you structure everything.
Thanks. So yeah, as you see on the left side first, actually, a lot of teams use Figma. I had to do some cleanup on like unfavoriting projects, but the most relevant ones are product design systems, which is what we're talking about. We have two major design systems. One is a Sentinel, which is the customer-facing side, and the Ultramarine is the TPO-facing side of it. I get the terms like Blue World and Red World. That's what we use internally. So for the Red World, Sentinel design system is a project within the team product design systems. The reason for this is on who has access to what, right? So we have editors here in the team that can like edit the designs, and then we can publish some stuff. Also in the same team, we have different projects where we would like to have a different access levels. So it's really the first step is to control on the access levels. And for this project, it's more product related. For the foundation, it's more branding team, as you see here. And so that's one of the reasons why.
Have you considered creating separate product design systems teams, or would you think that's too much admin for what you need at the moment?
I haven't considered that, but I would guess that it is definitely a lot of admin work. The advantages you could argue is when you have bigger teams working on individual design systems. So in our case, we are like one product design team, and we work on all the two that we have, both of them. So that's why it didn't make sense to have different teams.
Yeah. So for anybody that does work in an organization where you have maybe a design system team in London, a design system team in Rio, it probably makes sense to have them as separate actual teams inside of Figma. But if you're very cross-functional and working together, it definitely makes sense to have them as projects.
Yeah, that's perfectly put, yes.
On the file level, I can see you've got a couple of different file types here. Could you run us through what they mean and why they're split up?
Yeah. On the customer side, as I said, the Sentinel design system, we have global components, which are like the atoms in that terms. And then we have engines. So for example, our platform has sub features like audit, recommendations, and so on and so on. Each of them, we call them engines. So it's a platform specific term. But the global components, I can quickly run through, are basically what we all know as global components. So you can reuse them across different engines on the app. So in that atom sense, this is how the global components look like.
And you're using pages here for distinct, is that atomic level, organism level? Is it all, I think it's all atoms, right?
It is all atoms. Good thing that you mentioned about the page, because one key factor when deciding on a design system organization is to decide on who your audience are, right? Like if you're designing a design system on Figma for other designers, then your targets could be like, you want to make it easy for them to find it on their assets, that it'll be faster to build something on Figma. So that's your target user. Versus if it's only for the development team that you'd like to hand it off in a better way and so on, then you would organize them differently. And how different? In terms of, in our case, we did try to do it for both the designers and developers. I'll come to the dev part later, but for the designers, and answering the reason for pages is to organize these components in on Figma. I think we all know the standard thing to use backslashes and like include states and so on and so on. If the other alternate is to put all these components on one page, and then it looks massive, which is good. But in that case, your file names are like bloated. So in this case, it would be hover and so on and so on. You could still break it into variants, but having separate pages is just a way to find them easily when you're in the assets. So this is what I mean. This is a local components, but when you access this file from a different file where you have this as a library, then you can find them in this way, which you can also do it with the backslash, but it's also organized in your library file this way, if that made sense.
Have you considered, or did you ever consider, separate files for each of these pages?
No, I haven't, but I did read, and also some colleague friends of mine told me that if you have separate files, for example, let's talk about buttons, it's the most basic. If there are cases that you would want to research more on buttons and like you'd like to have some sub pages inside, so you have like why we used flat corners, why we used blah blah, then you'd like to put them all in one place, then it makes sense to have a separate file for each that you have different pages. So you have a research, you have a draft, and then blah blah, and you have probably the final submission version, which in technical terms could be like the branches and so on. But that would be a high maintenance initially. And
yeah,
I would recommend that.
Go on.
I would recommend that if you're publishing as a massive design system that others imagine like a B2C company, right? Your product is the design system, and that you would expect some developers to read through and use it. Then it makes sense to have them separate and that they can see why and so on.
Yeah, exactly. I think you'll come to this in a little bit about the developer side, but ultimately, one versus many files really depends on how many people are inside there, how many components you have, how much documentation you have, how many states, etc., etc., etc. The larger that those things become, the more it makes sense to have different files, whether that's an atomic or an organism level. It kind of depends on the scale, but one file with pages makes perfect sense for this use case.
Exactly, yeah. To start with, I've seen so many design systems. Even this started out as a one-page design system, and then as we grew into components, then I think dividing into pages is a good start point.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. Yeah, and now for the developer part, let me show you some kind of different approach that we take, Louis. When you think of a design system, the way you start designing them, or the journey of a design system, is a designer thinks about a component, how it should be, and so on, makes a design, tries to make it more perfect, and so on, and then publish it on a design system, so to say, and then spend a lot of time on perfecting that idea, and then spend a lot of time on handing it off to the developer, explaining it, the micro interactions, and so on. And after that, let's say they discover that hey, that's not possible, for that's hard to implement, and then we have to use a different way. Then there is a mismatch, and this is what I've experienced personally in my career too. So at Dataguard, what we do, which I'm really proud of, is when we have an idea, the first step is obviously, of course, there will be a lot of interactions between the product owner and so on the requirements. But once we get the as a task, so to say, then the designer will do a first draft, and then immediately, like in my case, for example, I would talk to the front end developer of that feature, and then like on that screen, on that Figma file that we're working on, we would evaluate the possibilities, and I will collaborate with them. They can even take some time off and make a POC, for example. And when they say, okay, yeah, this is possible, and when we are like on a common bridge, then I would wait as a designer, wait for them to actually develop it. We use Storybook.js, so to say. If some of you don't know it, Storybook.js is a fantastic way to organize your components, like when you code it. And we do use Tailwind CSS. Again, something new that I've learned a few months ago, but that's a fantastic way to organize design tokens, and like it completely separates them. Again, you can look it up. Tailwind CSS is a good recommendation from us. So once all these three are done, and then from the design team we do a QA. Let's say, haven't been doing a lot, to be honest, but once we do it, then we find, okay, this is a decently looking button, and then it goes into the design system. So if you see the global components, for example, these buttons are not first designed and then waited for first designed in this way, but they were designed and then they were developed, and any changes like, hey, this kind of a background is not possible because blah blah blah, and we adapt it, and that's when it goes into design system. And in short, my point being, design system, most people say, is not the start of a journey. To me, it's at the end of the system, right?
So
Yeah,
this is controversial is probably the wrong word, but very different to how most teams work. So you're effectively saying that for your design process, the design system is actually the last bit rather than the first bit, because the developers are actually building before you design, kind of.
yeah, yeah. It's a good point. Actually, I was listening to this podcast where they say most designers, when they showcase what they did, they would showcase their design system from a Figma file or from a design file, but not really what is developed, because 90% it will be different and so on and so on. So they're not really proud of it, or could be. But that is the reason I think putting design system addition to the end of the stage is a good thing. One more key reason I think is not to, when you start to think of design system, we end up thinking about those pixels and like trying to perfect that upfront before giving it off to the developer. And that is the step where a lot of time is wasted. So my recommendation would be, to not waste time on perfecting a design system component or anything that you think of. Put it to the end, make a first draft, collaborate with the dev, come on an agreement, and then add it to the design system.
So with that in mind, all of your Figma libraries are actually the live version. There's nothing work in progress here, although I did see a work in progress page somewhere.
Yes. Yeah. Let me get there. So there was a work in progress for playbooks. It was edited 8 months ago, as it's here. The idea with playbooks, I think there is a draft here, was when we have other UI designers, for example, then there should be some idea of inspiration. You know, when you think of a new feature, if it's a file upload on a pop-up that comes in a pop-up, so these are common issues that a pop-up in a pop-up, that sounds strange. So how do we handle that kind of situation? So playbook was meant to address that stuff, giving a bit of a background, but we haven't gotten that yet. Patterns is also something that's work in progress, which talks about micro interact, general patterns on UX. If you hit a checkbox, then does the check mark appear like a with that thing? So that's a pattern to me. That is also work in progress. But
So when you're building the first draft, is that using components, or is that still very rough? Or do you say, could you run us through how you're creating new components, for example? Maybe that's the better question.
It's a good question too. When I work on a feature, the place I start the design is not in the design system. Like, I don't go to Sentinel design, go to this page, create a new page, but rather we have a team for each product. So for example, the Red World, right? We have this project actually, which I was working on yesterday. I would create components. I'm not going to zoom in a lot for obvious reasons, but as you see something here, this is a component that I created on page. And yesterday I was aligning with the product owner and the developer. We all agreed on one thing. Okay, this makes sense. This is possible. And as you see, all the screen mockups are also in the same place. So at this stage, I'm going to wait for the dev to do a POC. And then once it's done, then I will move these files from here to the design system.
Right. Okay. So new suggestions are always file level, work in progress files that then go through that process you described, go through development, then pull back into the system.
Exactly.
Okay, this is a very unique workflow, but I love it. I love this approach, and I hope everybody in the audience also can appreciate this. Sometimes can actually reduce the amount of time that it takes to get something approved, live, tested, go through the QA process, because ultimately you know it's live in the product because it's already been coded.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. So back to the design system side, we've had a question in about the engine side and why there is the requirement for a separation of those components, engines. Ultimately, we have patterns there as well. Could you run us through the distinction between those separate types and why you think that's a requirement?
Yeah. Um, I think with this atomic model of component organization, atoms are in the global components, engines are separated. That's half of the reason. The other half is we work with development teams that are divided into engines. So in that previous example where I said audit is an engine and recommendations is an engine. So we have dev teams that work explicitly on audit, explicitly on recommendations. And having them all on as an engine would give the product owner of that dashboard, so to say, a more fine-grained access that he or she can share the right file easily, share the right page easily, and it gives a general hierarchy because that's the workflow that we follow. So in short, the answer is if your dev teams are divided in a specific logical way, then I would advise to follow the file structure parallel to that.
Cool. And how do you keep track of new components that need to be built from a design perspective?
We also work with sprints. So as I said, we have 4 development teams, for example. They all have a 2-week sprint period. And we designers also have a parallel sprint going on. In that sprint, like that other feature that I was just showing you, it shouldn't take too long or like beyond the sprint to finish this task. So towards the end of the sprint, our goal would be to bring it back to the design system and then we're done. So that's the easiest and the maybe optimistic way. But if it goes beyond and so on, then there have been cases like that, and we use Asana for project management. It's a simple list item there in the product backlog, product design backlog.
Okay, cool. And how do you manage new versions of existing components? Is it the same process?
No, actually. Oh, so you mean the development process? Yes, that is
Yeah.
true.
Let's say there's a new version of the button which has a rounded radius. How would that get from idea through development back to the system? And what would happen to the existing Figma components?
Good point. Well, if there is a new radius here, in this case, um, it would first go through the development process. That is true. We will test it out, but there has to be some strong reason why we're making such a small change, so to say. But the process is the same. I mean, yeah, we wait for the dev to finish that part. I'm actually thinking of an example that where it happened, where we upgraded an atomic component. Maybe cards actually. This is an example. So this is like a dashboard block. So we had an incremental version on the dashboards, which where this button was not existing before, and now we have it. So to make it possible, we had to move and like add some extra space here to fit this height. So that was a change where we obviously collaborated with the dev parallelly and then brought it back here. How on Figma? Yeah, I haven't used the branching feature yet, although we're on the org plan. But it would be a simple publish here, and all the features that we have will get this update. Like there's a new component update available. That's the standard.
On the updates of components across features, do you have a schedule where you publish things, or is it always make change, publish, update?
Yeah, in the product design team, it is make change, publish, update. On the non-product design side, which we will soon get to, there we have a weekly publishing schedule. There we have explicit library managers who would make some changes throughout the week and not publish them yet. And end of the week, they would publish and send a summary email. It's almost like, hey, here's a release log.
Right. Just on the topic of things like foundations, could you run us through how you're structuring colors, typography, that sort of thing as well?
Yeah. When we started working on design system, the ultramarine was not existing at that point. So our logic back then was the red world, which is Sentinel, is a separate entity, but the foundation will be maintained by the branding team. So colors and typography are here. They are published as styles, which I think you must be knowing. The organization is a bit parallel to Tailwind CSS. That's what I was mentioning before. That, for example, actually, it's probably easier to show it here. So this is how our color palette looks like. We have like UI main colors, some brands, some darks, and obvious states like info, success, warning, error. In the common brand colors, we do have different variations. So this, as you see in the name, it says bright red 100, 200. That's a pattern that Tailwind follows. So this is advantageous because when I use this color, for example, when the front end dev looks at this, then in a specific case, then they would just use this bright red 400, which is defined on Tailwind, and should not have to use the hex code directly. So my recommendation on the colors and naming would be follow the development framework that you're used to. So I was working with Bootstrap, for example, before, and they did not have so many sub levels. So you would follow only these common 5 brands, like 5 brand colors and like 4 or 5 state colors, and that should be enough. And then you play around with opacity, like you have one brand and then it looks like that on a light one, looks like this, and so on.
Okay.
So
Could
that,
you zoom in a little bit on the actual style palettes that the swatches that you've created in here, just so people can see how you've managed those as well?
Yeah. Well, again, for Tailwind, there were some tools. I exactly don't remember. It was months ago, but there's an online generator where you can submit this, and then it gives you all the 100 to 900 variations. And using that, I would generate the first palette, and after that, if some red or if some shade is like too odd for the screen, then there will be manual changes.
Okay. And is your typography structured similarly?
Completely, yes. So in the foundation, we have a typography. Yeah, as you see, it's not fancily presented. The reason is our fanciness is here in the way that we organize. In terms of typography, the common use cases are body, links, and labels. Labels are for like form fields and so on. Headlines are obviously for page headings. Body is the regular text. But in case of typography, we work with the sizing, almost like a t-shirt size, XS, SN, so on. So that very similar to the colors, we have a body organized that way. We have label organized this way. And yeah, that's how the typography is maintained.
Okay. And this is, I suppose, when you have those multiple systems running in different projects, the benefit is that you don't need to create a humongous possible duplication in here because they're actually different files where you have the theme effectively.
Hey, that's a really good point, actually. So imagine this file is on the red world or a Sentinel feature. Then when you go to the assets and libraries, there you have like product design systems and you have colors and so on. I did unpublish the colors from Ultramarine because we are in the process of deprecating them. But the blue world also has a slightly different color format, color system, which does have a strange palace, but has a similar Tailwind style structure. So when these two colors, for example, are on the same page, then it's conflicting. But if it's on a separate file altogether, then you have the flexibility to enable or disable the right colors. Yeah,
okay.
That's an advantage.
And are there plans to create more themes or more style guides as well, or are you happy with that structure at the moment? Is it likely to change at all?
Colors and so on are not likely to change. I am personally a fan of dark mode and light mode, so maybe there has to be a change. I haven't found a solution yet. To be honest, I actually saw one of your videos from on Fido, and they use a themer plugin. I think making use of plugins is a good idea. I will explore on that.
There's also something to think about as well, whether you actually need to go full on designing every light mode, dark mode component, or whether you test that because you've got such a tight integration with your developers anyway, whether that workload is actually heavy on the development side as opposed to the design side too. It's just something to consider.
That is true. Yes.
Okay, maybe we jump over and take a look at the marketing design system that you've built as well, and have a look at the structure there. I know there's tons of great work in here as well.
Yeah. So yeah, that's about the product design systems. Most of them are that way. What we recently started off with the branding actually is the brand designer. He created a lot of assets, and I think show some of them that he did them in Illustrator and so on. But we brought them all onto Figma and like published them as usable components. So that even if someone is doing a graphic design or like they want to make a flyer, for example, and they want to use the right photography, then you have them all as components on Figma. So this is a slightly different mind shift from a product designer to enabling design across the whole company. And we do that a lot in Dataguard since almost 2 years now. As a result of that, the marketing side, Louis, as you were saying, is on slide decks. So, for example, for sales and marketing, we have different versions of slide decks. Each file is a master. I can show one of them real quick. In the general, we have like S&M slides, privacy related slides, and infosec related slides. So these are all files of that contain master components. Let me show a pricing slide. That's a slightly complex one. So this is a library of don't smile yet. Pricing slide. What I mean by slides and how we enable our salespeople, so to say, for example, is let me take you through a journey. I think that would be more clear. We have great people in the team who create these templates. So if you are selling it to a customer or a prospect and you want to make a real quick pitch deck, then we use Figma for that. And for example, we have a product intro deck, which is in English and German, and we have English in UK and blah, 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 different versions. So if you see that deck,
I'm looking forward to when we get to the variants here as well.
Yeah. A bunch of slides and so on, right? But they're all components. So it's including the content, it's all unique. And now getting to that pricing slide, getting back to that. This is an example of a pricing slide.
Could you zoom in?
Making use. Yeah. Not a lot more than that, hopefully. But
okay.
The point that I want to show here is obviously the stuff on the side, the layers panel and on the variants option. So this is one pricing slide, for example, which is part of that intro deck for a salesperson. Then we have some variants here which define like if the company of the prospect is a 51 to 100 employee company, and then so on. Then the values here, the price values automatically change, giving them no scope for error. Yeah, because the CNS was high. So if it's a low need score and with a different employee count and so on, we get the values already. So the sales executive
and the language and the language change as well.
And the language change. So all of that is in German for now. You have one in English, and then UK is also English, but slightly different words and the pound. So this kind of a 3-level variant, which is most common for us in buttons and states, but to use that for a pricing slide, mean that this scale amount or this amount of slides are needed. But to manage any subtle change here, Louis, that's where I was more proud of. Is for example, if you want to change this blue to red and so on, if you did not use an inception level of components, nested components, I mean, then it would be impossible. So if you see here, this is the child component or instance of the master. If I go on double clicking, then as you see, it's a lot of nested components. But let me take you through. So the final one is the one that is consumed by other editors on Figma. One level deep is a language master. If you see here, this does not have any values on the right, but only has line items in the left. So that's the language part. And one level down here in the language, as you see, this component does not contain any other layers, but just another instance of one more component. If you go there, that's a structure master. So in the structure master, you have like one without a note, one with a note, but the content is not here. So it's just labels. And then one level deep is like pricing row. And that's where the design part comes in. And inside each row, you have like a cell, which is also another component, which is right here. So that's like the most base component. So it's not one base component and then use of it, but like seriously nested base components that makes it super easy. And now in the previous case where I said, yeah, if you want to change this to red, then you change it in that structure master, maybe 4 slides, but that would result to change in hundreds of them.
Yeah, I have lots of questions.
Yeah, go on.
I don't know where to start. The first one is, how do you manage all of these individual moving parts to make sure that it was correct? What was the process to say, okay, well, we have 10 levels of nesting. How do we map that out as a potential, okay, we're going to need 100 components or 100 slide components, and this is what needs to go inside. How did you manage that from an ideation and management perspective?
Good point, actually. So let's see. There is a reason. Yeah, I think the first step in this marketing side of designs comes from the branding team. So someone there who's not really experienced with components and so on would give a rough idea of this is how they would like to imagine the design. And looking at this, just like when a product designer looks at a website, that there is a mental brick segregation or the div segregation. So I would have that here. And then with the power of auto layouts, actually, I have to say that, that you if you start thinking in auto layouts, like try to make every design or every layout that you see into an auto layout. It's really that was the first reason on how best to organize it. So even if I, let's say, delete these cells, the 2 cells here expand, but not the label. And that's the kind of decision logic you have to make when you create auto layouts. And that's a good practice when you see any structured layout. Try to replicate that using auto layout feature on Figma. And with that, the first step would obviously be identifying the completely root component in the nested levels. So in this case, it was obvious that the cell was the root level, and so I started off with that. In terms of timing, really go ahead. Do not think about the namings yet. So I would straight away start by creating a frame, making something in that, and then calling it a component already. Doesn't matter if it's a frame or so on, and then just use that right as a row, for example. After that, making that as a new component, and then maybe just calling it row, and then I can test around. Okay, this makes sense. Yeah, maybe the size doesn't make sense. So every time you work on like one level, try to create the level above that right on that same screen, so you see the changes. And then you can fine tune this level. Okay, now it makes sense, so on. And you can also practice the next level of how that row will be used. So in that case, maybe so. And then try to delete one of the components. And then say, okay, yeah, this does not expand fully to the corners and so on. So then you would go to this second level back. It's really going back up and down in that elevator of Inception and changing this from fixed to fill, and then you get the desired result.
So I think quite importantly here is that you're fine-tuning the auto layout when it starts to come together.
Correct.
rather than trying to make it perfect in the atomic level and then another level and then another level.
Yeah, that would be impossible actually, because at this stage, I can't decide if I would want a fixed height or a fill container yet until I see the use of it, or in this case, level 1, level 2, and level 3. So yeah, that
I
was
think
how
that's
it
a
started.
very good lesson. Even though we're looking at slide decks here, it's a really useful lesson for building product design as well. When you're building your components from an atomic organism molecule level, is to think the context every time you're building something. I find myself doing this as well, where I try and build an atomic level perfect component, and then in context, that's meaningless. So if we think in context backwards, effectively, like how you have the development backwards workflow for your design system management, you can have that at component level inside your libraries too.
Yeah, spot on.
Awesome. Okay, where should we go next?
Yeah, we have 15 minutes left. I think I have one last closing lesson. The learning, and I'll show that in a bit. Also on the non-product designers, I would like to close on one topic. So if you're working a lot with marketeers or like non-Figma designers, then I would really advise spending time on documenting what to do. As you see, this is one example where we sent it out to sales executives on how to create or how to use that template. So not going to have to go through the details, but really visualize what your workflow is in any software that you'd like, but we use Figma again to reuse the same slide background and so on. That's that point. And the last thing is a 200 IQ sheet. So far, all the hacky stuff that I was talking about, as you probably noticed, I was like really proud and so on. It's a high IQ brain time. To summarize what we discussed in the teams and projects, really separate files as much as you can and publish, but not too much separation, like we discussed the buttons and so on. Save to version history. Most Figma people that I talked to did not know about that yet. You don't have a save on Figma, but you can still save it to version history, despite the automatic versions that get generated. This is a good milestone that you can follow. Commit messages properly when you publish. Try to use the message field and like add a good comment that will show up on the version history. So that's a good exercise. Design systems part, we did talk about this, who your design system users are. If it's other designers, then make it perfect on Figma level, and then others can use it on the Figma level. If it's only devs, then try using other tools like Zero Height, which we also tried, where you have the ability to connect it to Storybook and then use it as a documentation. If it's only for Dribble, in my personal view, that's a bit selfish, because you're just showing off your skill on Figma or any other design, and then publishing it on your community. That's also good. I mean, I do have a Dribble, I do publish stuff, but when you work on a design system and try to solve an issue, then don't just do it for Dribble. Involve the developer before publishing. We talked about that. And as a product designer, I would really advise to learn some CSS and the basic front end, especially because you know when you're designing what is possible already before you even talk to the dev. And ensure 100% sync between what is developed and what is designed. There is always a huge gap between what's on the design on Figma and what's really live on the product. We also do not have it 100% yet in Dataguard. We're trying to minimize that gap, and that should be the goal for a product design team. Working with design tokens, in our case, Tailwind CSS, and showing examples of use. So in the pricing example where we saw, I was designing a unique component, a base component, and then immediately next to it, all the possible use cases of how it's used. So when you're talking or collaborating with dev, it just helps in the communication side. Documenting the research and the why, that's a point that we do not do it yet, but it's good that, in my opinion. And the most important point is feed your design system like a baby. So it is so easy that it gets stale, the design system. So try to keep adding new updates and adding more like documentation to it. Just keep it alive like a baby. And in conclusion, a design system is never finished. It's a common thing that most people say. It's a live thing. on these points, I will not explain a lot. We have 10 minutes left, and I'd like to spend time on Q&A. Happy to share this to the community soon. This is the first time I and Dataguard coming out. So,
great. Okay, a couple of questions coming in already. You make heavy use of nested or arguably base components when you're building out your slide deck design system. Is there any reason why you've kept your product design system very flat?
That's actually a continuation to who uses these design systems. In the product design systems, we are the ones that use it, so we know when something goes off or not, what is the level of change required. In case of the slide decks, using so many nested components, the reason is the amount of change requests that come in and the frequency of changes that are asked are so high. Like when you work with the sales stakeholder, that they would like one design once, maybe that's helping sell the idea. And after a week or so, they would like to change it and then test a different version. It's so actively changed there, so that you have to anticipate what changes are about to come. So that's why a lot of nested and logical thinking there, and less here.
Okay, great. So kind of potentially reducing the amount of debt that you have in a design file side. How do you manage design debt on the code side?
At the moment, it's a regular agile process. We use GitLab for project management. I don't have any magic sauce here. It goes as a task on backlog. The devs take it up in a regular sprint.
Okay. So there is a process, but it's just not necessary. It's heavy on the development side.
It is not, yes. It is not as high prior as features and so on, but design debts are less prioritized indeed, yes. Right. Because we don't have
something we didn't. Yeah, well, that's perfect. Something we didn't mention in a lot of detail is your approach to naming components on a sort of individual, like primary button, secondary button, etc. Could you jump a bit into that?
I would love to, but I'm not so happy on that too. Okay. So I think this is really a first draft, and then you have to keep trying different variations. Because let me give you an example. So we have a sidebar component, right? We call it menu sidebar and a process sidebar. And someone who would use it would probably call it a navigation menu, right? So the terms are constantly changing, and if your target users are someone on Figma and they're designing a screen, they would go to the assets and search for navigation. They wouldn't find it. So it's really a trial and error with the naming. So the only sweet spot comes in when we publish it.
Just as a piece of advice for anybody who would like to do both of those things, you can make use of the description field on all of your components to add other tags or other names for your components as well. So sidebar, navigation, panel, header, whatever, you can add that in the description field to make sure it surfaces when you are searching for those components. So it's just something worth testing out there as well.
That is really cool. Yeah. Hey, see, you learn something new every day.
Exactly. And switching up slightly from a more organizational perspective, how did you manage to motivate people to use all of this excellent work that you've been building?
Product design systems required very least motivation, because most product designers that were in the team know the value of it. And the only hurdle, I think, was when trying to replicate this back onto the developers, because that added a lot of technical debt to them. So then it required a lot of communication. And how did I solve that? It was to show the importance of repeated work and redundant work, so to say. So if a dev if there are change requests, for example, to change the button to red and blue, or from red to blue, that would create a lot of technical debt. But instead, if you used components and like reusable blocks and so on, it would make it easy. So that's why a design system is helpful. So you have to feel the heat, and then you will not touch the fire. So it's similar to that, right? The devs have to face that time pressure and like, oh man, this I have to like do a lot of stuff. then the adoption is more faster in design system. For the non-product design systems, it was really showing the value. It takes so long to see the value. I can actually show you the analytics, I think. From here. So the used by and inserts last week are really changing, but that gives you a good insight on which components are being used and which not. So make use of that. And
right. Something we haven't touched on at all is how we structure design work outside of systems. Do you have any advice on what works for you or what you'd recommend people do for that perspective too?
Yeah, in our case, we have a separate team for the red world, so to say, the customer side of it. And what we were trying out to is we have a project for each feature inside that red world. And inside that project, as of now, there's only one file because we were done with it. But our expectation was if you have this data subject request as a feature, that we will try out different variations per quarter, right? So we, as a company level, work with the quarterly goals. And then this is NA2 is like a non-audit task, second quarter code. So if that's not dealt in the second quarter for some reason and it got stale, then we create a new file and update that. So this goes into history. So any design work per feature is a project in our case, and each file is a state in that timeline.
And is that something you are happy with, that process, or would you change it or alter it going forward?
No comments, actually. It has been working out well enough for us. As you saw, the expectation was that we will have so many files here, but we just have one. So I think it's working okay. In the blue world side, though, we do have some more variations possibilities. I think it all comes down to access levels and who you would like to work with, you would like to share it with. That defines how many files you'd like to have.
And on that structure side, do you invite your developers to the entire team of the product, or is it to a project or to a file? How does that manage?
Good point. Usually it's for less confusion for that project level. And if it's a dev that is senior in level and like he or she is working on a variety of products, features, then I would invite them to the whole team. As you see in this case, we have like 5+4. Yeah, they're invited to the whole red world team. But in specific features case, in case of blue world, for example, to have a different members for different features at the project level.
Right. Well, I think that's a very nice point for us to wrap up. Thank you so much for the thoughtful and expansive presentation. You covered a lot of different aspects of design systems, regardless of whether that's a product or a marketing or a brand. You covered a lot of ground. So thank you so much. And thank you everybody for attending.
Thank you, Louis. It's an honor to be here. I'd like to just say thanks to Benedict, who was hugely helpful in building this product design system.
Yeah, thanks everybody. And we will see you all for the next one.
Thank you all.